Have you ever imagined that some of the most powerful and influential people in history had quirks so strange that if they happened today, they'd become memes in seconds? That's right. Behind the crowns, conquests, and imposing portraits, there were human beings full of oddities. Some funny, others disturbing, and even downright creepy. Today, we're diving into a lesser explored side of history, the secret and bizarre habits of figures who changed the world. Kings, queens, artists, scientists, they all had customs so unexpected they seem straight out of a TV series. And let me warn you, we're not just talking about silly eccentricities, but practices that defy our imagination. Did you know, for example, that one of the greatest scientific geniuses had an unhealthy obsession with numbers, or that a powerful emperor kept a nighttime ritual so strange it frightened even his advisors? What's most curious is realizing that behind these quirks, there were often clues about their personality, mental health, or even their strategies for power. It's as if each habit was a secret window into understanding who they really were, beyond the official version that history books insist on showing. Get ready, because from now on, you'll discover stories that range from funny to sinister, and by the end, it'll be hard to look at these characters the same way. So are you already curious to uncover the first of these strange habits? Imagine one of the greatest geniuses of humanity, someone who revolutionized how we understand the universe. Now picture that same person spending hours and hours washing their hands repeatedly, as if the entire world were a giant repository of invisible germs. I'm talking about none other than Nikola Tesla. Tesla was brilliant, but also carried quirks that bordered on obsession. One of the most curious was his deep aversion to dirt and microbes. He couldn't stand shaking someone's hand, and when he couldn't avoid it, he'd rush to wash his hands as if purging himself of poison. Can you imagine a man who dreamed of illuminating the entire planet running away from a simple handshake? But it doesn't stop there. Tesla also had a strange fixation with the number 3. He would only enter a building after circling it 3 times. Plates, napkins, objects in general. Everything had to be in multiples of 3. It's almost as if his brain operated on a secret code that governed every movement. Some historians suggest this was the result of obsessive-compulsive disorder, while others believe it was part of his eccentric way of dealing with the world. The fact is, between revolutionary inventions and futuristic visions, Tesla was also battling his own demons, and these strange habits were part of that. Now, if you found that quirk curious, just wait until you hear about the nighttime habits of a Roman emperor that literally made his subjects' hair stand on end. Take a deep breath and picture this scene. You're living in Rome at the height of the empire, and the most powerful man in the world has a habit so bizarre that even his generals whisper about it in the corridors. I'm talking about Caligula, the emperor famous for his cruelty and eccentricity. Among the many strange habits attributed to him, one of the most curious and disturbing was his relationship with horses. That's right, Caligula had such an obsession with his favorite horse, Incitatus, that he treated it better than most of the population. The animal had a marble stable, jeweled collars, and even its own servants. And as if that weren't extravagant enough, Caligula announced plans to make the horse a consul of Rome, one of the most important political positions of the time. Can you imagine? It's like someone today deciding to appoint their dog as the Minister of Finance. Some historians argue this was just a way to mock the political elite, showing that even a horse could govern better than the senators. Others believe Caligula genuinely thought it was a good idea, a product of his mental instability. Either way, this habit became a symbol of the mix of absolute power and delusion. And the most incredible part? That wasn't even his only bizarre ritual. There are reports that Caligula liked to talk to the moon as if it were his personal confidant. Weird, right? But hold on, because the next character on our list had an even stranger habit. He literally collected the unexpected in jars. Picture walking into a luxurious room filled with shelves, and instead of books or jewels, finding jars with human organs. Strange, right? Well, that was one of the quirks of Peter the Great, the Tsar of Russia. Peter was known for his almost obsessive desire to modernize his country. He wanted to bring Western science and technology to a Russia still stuck in medieval ways. But his curiosity sometimes took rather, let's say, eccentric turns. One of his most bizarre practices was collecting anatomical curiosities. Yes, he ordered organs, deformed fetuses, and body parts to be preserved in alcohol jars, displayed as if they were museum pieces. The idea, of course, was to encourage the study of medicine. But for his subjects at the time, it was seen as something macabre, almost demonic. Many believed the Tsar had made a pact with dark forces, simply because no one could understand why anyone would take pleasure in looking at that. And there's more. Peter also forced nobles to shave their beards, which in Russian tradition was almost sacrilegious. He even imposed a beard tax to enforce the modernization of customs. In other words, it wasn't enough to rule with an iron fist. He wanted to reshape the appearance and even the most intimate habits of his subjects. Now think about it. If a Tsar could collect creepy jars and change fashion by force, imagine what other rulers might have done in secret. And here's a heads up. The next on the list was so obsessed with his diet that he came up with bizarre rules for every meal. Have you ever met someone who follows a crazy diet? Well, none of them come close to Pythagoras, the famous Greek philosopher and mathematician. Yes, the same one from the Pythagorean theorem you probably heard about in school. Besides revolutionizing mathematics, he also had dietary habits that border on the unbelievable. Pythagoras believed certain foods had mystical properties that could influence the soul, and among all of them, there was one he deeply despised: beans. For him, eating beans wasn't just a matter of taste, it was a spiritual danger. He believed the grains contained the essence of the souls of the dead, and that consuming them could corrupt the spirit. This aversion was so serious that it became a kind of sacred rule among his followers. Legend has it that Pythagoras chose to die rather than cross a field of beans. Imagine fleeing from armed enemies but refusing the escape route because there were beans in the way. Some scholars think this obsession might be linked to ancient religious beliefs, or even to the fact that certain types of beans can cause toxic reactions in some people. But either way, the image of one of the greatest philosophical minds of antiquity running from a simple plate of beans is, at the very least, curious. And the most intriguing part is realizing how even brilliant minds can carry such peculiar superstitions. Now, if you thought that was weird, wait until you hear about a genius artist who turned his obsession with clothing into a daily spectacle. Picture a man who didn't need a stage to draw attention because the street itself became his personal runway. That was Salvador Dali, the master of surrealism, who not only painted distorted dreams on canvas, but also turned his own life into a bizarre work of art. Dali had a habit of dressing in completely eccentric ways, often bordering on the theatrical. It wasn't uncommon for him to appear in public wearing outfits reminiscent of gala attire from centuries past, mixed with entirely unconventional elements like capes, ornate canes, and even diving suits. Yes, on one occasion, he attended a lecture wearing a full diving suit, claiming he was diving into the depths of the human mind. And it wasn't just the clothing. Dali cultivated his famous twirled mustache with devotion, treating it as if it were a living signature. He claimed his mustache was a cosmic antenna, capable of capturing energies from the universe. Such a simple detail became yet another symbol of his extravagance. The most curious thing is that these eccentricities weren't just random quirks. They were part of a deliberate strategy to build his image. Dali knew that in the art world, being remembered was as important as creating. So his bizarre habits were like free publicity. No one could ignore him. And let's be honest, it worked. Even today, Dali's persona is as iconic as his paintings. But hold on, because our next character took the concept of strange habits to a much more, let's say, terrifying level. If we've already seen some odd habits so far, brace yourself, because now we're entering dark territory. Imagine a ruler so feared that his nickname became synonymous with terror across centuries. I'm talking about Ivan the Terrible, the Tsar of Russia in the 16th century. Ivan wasn't just cruel in battles or ruthless in politics. His personal habits were also disturbing. One of the most talked about was his bizarre tendency to torture animals for amusement. He enjoyed watching their suffering as if it were a form of entertainment. To us, this sounds horrifying, and it is, but for Ivan it seemed almost like a pastime. Another peculiar habit was carrying a pointed staff, which he used to prod and injure people nearby, often for no reason at all. It was as if his cruelty needed to manifest in everyday gestures, even in the most mundane moments. And the most macabre detail, it said that Ivan had fits of rage so intense that in one of them he ended up killing his own son in a burst of anger. The scene was immortalized in a painting by Ilya Repin, depicting the desperate Tsar holding his heir's body. It's an anguished portrait of how deeply his violent habits were rooted in his personality. It's chilling to think how small quirks can reveal something so profound about someone's mind. And if Ivan's bizarre leaned toward the cruel, our next historical figure's oddity came from the realm of genius, and a hobby almost no one would expect. Now, how about stepping away from the dark atmosphere and diving into a habit that blends genius and strangeness in equal measure? I'm talking about Albert Einstein, the father of the theory of relativity, but also the owner of some remarkably curious quirks. Einstein was known for his disheveled appearance, wrinkled clothes, messy hair, and of course that unmistakable mustache. But what few know is that he had an unexpected hobby he pursued with genuine passion, playing the violin. So far so good, but the intensity with which he indulged in this habit was unusual. He could spend hours immersed in music, completely forgetting important commitments or serious meetings. And there's more. Einstein also had a habit of not wearing socks. Yes, he simply hated them. To him, they were completely unnecessary. He once declared that his toes inevitably made holes in them, so it was better to avoid the problem altogether. The result? He'd show up to formal events and even academic meetings in sandals without the slightest concern. This eccentric style became part of his charm and the image of the genius, absent-minded scientist. After all, who would imagine that while unraveling the mysteries of the universe, Einstein was thinking about how to escape the annoyance of socks? These habits show how even the greatest geniuses carry small eccentricities that make them more human. And speaking of genius with a touch of oddity, our next character took his obsession with hygiene to an almost unbelievable level. Now, imagine living in a gigantic palace surrounded by luxury, but being completely dominated by one obsession: avoiding dirt at all costs. That was the case with Ludwig II of Bavaria, the famous Mad King, who, besides building fairy tale castles, also had some rather extreme hygiene habits. Ludwig was obsessed with the idea of purity and cleanliness. He avoided direct contact with others as much as possible and couldn't stand the thought of sharing utensils or clothing. Legend has it that he ordered towels, sheets, and even furniture to be replaced at an absurd frequency just to ensure nothing was contaminated. And that's not all. Ludwig used to take long nighttime baths by candlelight, surrounded by flowers and music. For many, it seemed almost like a mystical ritual, a blend of hygiene and fantasy. It was as if water served not only to cleanse his body, but also to purify his soul. This obsession with cleanliness added to his increasingly reclusive life. The king avoided public appearances and preferred to be surrounded by servants who followed strict contact rules. To his subjects, these habits seemed like signs of mental instability, something that only reinforced his reputation as an eccentric or even insane king. But at the same time, Ludwig left behind palaces like Neuschwanstein, which today seems straight out of a dream. Perhaps his quest for purity was tied to his desire to create an ideal world. And to wrap up this journey through quirks and secrets, let's meet a modern political leader whose habits were so peculiar they still intrigue scholars today. We've reached our final character, and he proves that strange habits aren't confined to the distant past. I'm talking about Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister who led the country during World War II. Besides being a brilliant strategist and unforgettable orator, Churchill had habits that left everyone stunned. One of them was working in the bathtub. That's right. He spent hours in the water dictating speeches and reports while aides balanced papers and typewriters around him. For Churchill, hot water was the perfect environment for thinking. Imagine the scene, the fate of the world being decided amid bubbles and towels. Another curious detail, he was passionate about cigars and whiskey, consuming them in quantities that would be unthinkable for any doctor to approve today. For many, this might seem like a lack of care for his health. For him, it was simply part of his routine. These, at the very least, unusual habits help show how even the greatest historical figures were full of quirks and eccentricities. From the Tsar who collected organs in jars, to the scientist who fled from socks, to emperors who talked to the moon, the truth is clear. Behind the titles and achievements, there were always complex human beings full of oddities. So, which of these habits did you find the most bizarre? Let us know in the comments because I'm dying to hear. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next curious stories that seem straight out of a movie, but really happened.